This is Lesson 23.2, Nation Building in Italy, Germany, and the United States. How did conflict and war lead to the construction of strong nation-states in Italy, Germany, and the United States? College Board Topic 7.2, Nationalism. Explain how the development and spread of nationalism affected Europe from 1815 to 1914. Nationalists encourage loyalty to the nation in a variety of ways, including romantic idealism, liberal reform, political unification, racialism with a concomitant anti-Semitism, and chauvinism justifying national aggrandizement. A new generation of conservative leaders, including Napoleon III, Cavour, and Bismarck, used popular nationalism to create or strengthen the state. College Board Topic 7.3, National Unification and Diplomatic Tensions. Explain the factors that resulted in Italian unification and German unification. Cavour's diplomatic strategies, combined with the popular Garibaldi's military campaigns, led to the unification of Italy. Bismarck used Realpolitik, employing diplomacy, industrialized warfare, weaponry, and the manipulation of democratic mechanisms to unify Germany. Places: Italy, Germany, and the U.S., and the time frame is 1848 to about 1870. Key concepts of nation building in Italy, Germany, and the United States: the Albertine Statute, the Thousand or the Red Shirts, Realpolitik, the North German Confederation, and the Homestead Act of 1862. Key people of nation building in Italy, Germany, and the United States: Victor Emmanuel II, Count Camillo Benso di Cavour, Giuseppe Garibaldi, Count Otto von Bismarck, and Wilhelm I. And here is Italy. And what we want to notice on Italy is, of course, as it has always been up to this point, it's a hodgepodge of states. The most powerful one is this purple one, the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia. And another significant one is at the bottom, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which includes the lower half of Italy and the island of Sicily. Just above that, you have the Papal States. And at the very top, you have Lombardy and Venetia, which are under the control of the Austrian Empire. Napoleon III offered other leaders a question to ponder. Will the people, the middle class and the working class, both of which are expanding, rally around a nation-state that is strong, is conservative, promises economic growth, promises benefits, and promises national unity? This was the central political question of the 1850s and 1860s, and perhaps this was a new universal model for successful nation building. Italy before 1850. Clemens von Metternich, architect of the Congress of Vienna, referred to Italy merely as a geographical expression. It's not a country. You only see the word Italy in geography books. The Italian peninsula had been politically divided in various configurations ever since the fall of ancient Rome. 1815 to 1848. Italians started getting excited about this Italian nation idea. Italy existed, as it always had, as individual states. Some of them had foreign powers ruling them. In order to unify a geographical expression, you needed a pathway. Doors needed to open. A track to run on needed to appear. What was it going to be? Giuseppe Mazzini, he proposed a republic that would be centralized, be democratic, have universal male suffrage, and follow the will of the people. His vision was the soul of Italian unification, and he became one of the leaders of the short-lived Republic of Rome. The Austrians managed to crush that movement, and Mazzini went into exile in Switzerland. But he left a lot of people behind whom he had influenced. One of those was Vincenzo Gioberti. He was a priest, and he proposed the idea of an Italian federation of existing states, and the leader would be a progressive pope. Pope Pius IX was looking like he might be the guy. He was dismantling archaic Vatican institutions. He proclaimed a free press. He got rid of foreign mercenaries. And he had created a council of ministers. Would that perhaps evolve into some kind of Italian parliament? In 1848, Pope Pius IX was driven from Rome by a revolt. There were many revolts going on in 1848. And because of this, he did a complete 180 on any modern trends. In fact, in 1864, he published the Syllabus of Errors, in which he categorized all kinds of statements that had been published in various writings since 1848 on all kinds of subjects. He said all of these were wrong. He didn't bother to say why they were wrong, He probably thought the reasons were self-evident. So once again, this door to the Italian nation also closed. Victor Emmanuel II, he was king of Piedmont-Sardinia. And Piedmont-Sardinia was to Italy as Prussia was to the German Confederation. The Italian people looked to Piedmont-Sardinia for leadership. Piedmont was the most modern and industrialized part of Italy, and Victor Emmanuel II was a powerful and respected Italian king. His father had been Carlo Alberto, or Charles Albert, and he had been king of Piedmont-Sardinia in 1848. Remember that in 1848, revolutions and revolts were happening in over 50 European countries. Several of those had been in Italy, for example in Rome, in San Marco, Milan, and Venice, etc. These revolts were called the First Italian War of Independence, and numerous places rebelled against foreign domination and absolute rule. These all failed, and Charles Albert gained something for Italy in the midst of this failure. The textbook doesn't even name his name, but he did three important things for Italy. First, Carlo Alberto agreed to and signed a constitution for Piedmont-Sardinia. Constitutions mean three things to a monarch. They mean limited power, shared with a representative body. They mean rights and protections for the people, and they also mean expanded voting rights for the people. The Constitution was called the Albertine Statute, and it gave a fair degree of civil liberties. It specified a parliamentary government with representative deputies, and voting was based on income. Our textbook says that he signed the Albertine Statute under duress, but the fact is that Carlo Alberto refused to sign it until he got what he wanted written into it, which was a strong monarchy and the preeminence of the Catholic religion. Second, Carlo Alberto fought a war against Austrian domination in Italy. Piedmont-Sardinia was not under Austrian domination. Instead, he fought on behalf of the city of Milan. He was hoping that the city would be grateful to him, and then they would agree to being annexed by him. Unfortunately, Carlo Alberto lost that war with Austria. Several powerful allies abandoned him, most prominently Pope Pius IX. Third, Carlo Alberto managed to keep that constitution for his people in the midst of his loss to Austria. He signed a peace treaty with Austria, and he agreed to abdicate as king in favor of his son, Victor Emmanuel. And then he retired to live in Portugal, and he soon died there. But before he went, Austria agreed to let Piedmont-Sardinia keep its constitution, the Albertine Statute. After 1849, the only path left for the unification of Italy was Victor Emmanuel II. Everybody else had either failed or quit. And the great powers of Europe, they didn't want to unify Italy. It would disrupt the balance of power. Look what happened in France. In France, there had been an 1848 revolution that Austria couldn't control. It got rid of the monarchy, which had been established by the Congress of Vienna, ending with Louis Philippe. France created a republic, with Louis Napoleon as president. And then Louis Napoleon overthrew that republic and got himself voted Napoleon III emperor for life. Austria didn't like Napoleon III because they no longer had a controllable ally on the French throne. Count Camillo Benso di Cavour, he was King Victor Emmanuel II's prime minister. He had held several positions before becoming prime minister. He was Piedmont-Sardinia's Minister of Agriculture and Trade. He was Piedmont-Sardinia's Minister of Finance. He was building highways and railroads. He was expanding civil liberties, and he was getting rid of clerical privilege. Cavour saw a path to unite at least the northern part of Italy. Problem was, Austria owned most of it. They had gotten Lombardy and Venetia in 1815 as part of the Congress of Vienna. It had been compensation to them for defeating Napoleon. So Cavour needed a powerful ally, somebody who didn't like Austria. Who was the perfect ally if you wanted to overthrow Austrian rule? Cavour's plan was this: forge a mutual defense treaty with, of course, Napoleon III. Get Austria to attack, Napoleon III helps fight Austria, and we win back Austrian-held territory, and northern Italy becomes a nation for the first time in history. In 1859, the plan was working. It was called the Second Italian War of Independence, and the Sardinians won a couple of big battles against Austria. Doors toward nationhood were opening up all over even central Italy. Nationalists were taking advantage of Austria's defeats to overthrow their ruling princes, and Cavour was encouraging them to unite with Piedmont-Sardinia. In July 1859, Napoleon went behind their backs and negotiated a separate treaty with Austria. It was called the Villafranca Armistice. Why did he do that? Well, Napoleon III's alliance with Piedmont-Sardinia was very unpopular at home. The French people loved their Pope, and Pope Pius IX hated Piedmont-Sardinia. If Cavour could just get Napoleon III back on the team, the unification of northern Italy would be a done deal. In 1860, Cavour managed to get Napoleon III back on board. But in order to accomplish this, he sacrificed Savoy and Nice by giving them to France. Now that the alliance between France and Piedmont-Sardinia was back on, Cavour managed to get these revolutionary states to put unification with Piedmont-Sardinia to a vote in their various locations. The decision for these states was a pretty easy one. Victor Emmanuel II was a popular king, and his first minister, Cavour, had liberal progressive programs. Also, Piedmont-Sardinia already had a constitution, the Albertine Statute, with a 10-year track record, and these states would have instant protection from foreign powers. These new revolutionary states voted overwhelmingly to join Piedmont-Sardinia. Victor Emmanuel II and Cavour now had a unified northern half of Italy, and what Metternich had said about Italy just became a lot less true. Could the momentum continue? One of the deputies in Piedmont-Sardinia's parliament was a man named Giuseppe Garibaldi. First, he was the quintessential romantic hero. He had gone into exile twice for revolting against the Piedmont-Sardinia government when he was young. He had been a good friend of Giuseppe Mazzini. He had been a rebel pirate in Brazil. He had commanded the Uruguayan Navy. He had commanded the Italian Legion in Montevideo. And he even had a nickname, the Hero of Two Worlds. Second, Garibaldi was a celebrity, a famous folk hero, a super patriot. Abraham Lincoln had even offered him his own Union command in the U.S. Civil War. And journalists, spies, and secret police hung out at his house. Garibaldi was an experienced guerrilla fighter. Victor Emmanuel made him a major general in the fight against Austria. And Garibaldi led a group of fighters called the Hunters of the Alps. And he had lots of success against the Austrians. Fourth, guess what district Garibaldi represented in Parliament? His hometown of Nice. And in 1859, Cavour gave it to France. Garibaldi was furious at Cavour for doing that. In 1860, Garibaldi married a girl he was in love with named Giuseppina Raimondi. And at the wedding, Giuseppe Garibaldi got a note saying that his new bride was already pregnant with another man's child. He confronted her, and she admitted it was true, and Garibaldi left her at the wedding and never spoke to her again. There was a large kingdom in southern Italy called the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. This state had had two constitutions, one in 1830, one in 1848, both of which had been quickly revoked. The king was Francis II, and he was a Bourbon absolute monarch. Cavour had asked Francis II to join Piedmont-Sardinia a couple of times, and he wouldn't do it. The people there were demanding a constitution, but Francis II wouldn't sign one. So a rebellion was breaking out on the island of Sicily. Cavour and Victor Emmanuel II asked Garibaldi to go to Sicily and help. Cavour really just wanted to get rid of Garibaldi. Plus, Garibaldi might just pull something off. Victor Emmanuel II couldn't officially sanction an invasion, so Garibaldi couldn't take the Hunters of the Alps with him. So Garibaldi hesitated to invade Sicily, but then he agreed, and he recruited the 1,000, also known as the Red Shirts. These were not professional soldiers. They were almost entirely made up of idealistic middle-class professional people of all sorts. Garibaldi and his men got on 2 ships and sailed for Sicily. Garibaldi arrived in Sicily, quickly took the island, and crossed over to the Italian mainland. He headed up towards Naples, the capital of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Back in Piedmont-Sardinia, Cavour and King Victor Emmanuel II realized that they just might have created a potential monster here. Everyone knew that Pope Pius IX was protected from his own people by French troops. If Garibaldi were to push beyond Naples and attack French troops in Rome, it could mean war with France. Cavour sent Sardinian troops to occupy the Papal States except for the city of Rome. And Cavour staged a referendum in the areas that Garibaldi had just conquered, and they voted to join Piedmont-Sardinia. Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel II met in Naples and rode through the city together in triumph in a huge victory parade. At this moment, everyone knew that this meant that the nation of Italy was a reality. 1860 was the banner year for Italian unification, or 1870 if you want to include Rome and Venice. Italy was no longer just a geographical expression. It was a fragile unity. Only 500,000 out of 22 million had the right to vote. The propertied and common people were divided. North and South were divided, much like North and South in the U.S. But Italy was no longer just a geographical expression. But Garibaldi resented the loss of Nice to France for the rest of his life. Germany. 1848 to 1850 saw its share of upheaval in Germany, as we know. Two different national assemblies tried to unify the German Confederation into a German nation. Friedrich Wilhelm IV had promised a constitution as well as a merging of Prussia and the German Confederation. But then he did a complete 180 and dissolved the Berlin Assembly and let the Frankfurt Assembly collapse after his rejection of its proposed constitution. He refused to accept the constitution that the Frankfurt Assembly offered him, calling it a crown from the gutter. Instead, Friedrich Wilhelm IV had imposed the Constitution of Prussia. This constitution was very conservative, even reactionary. However, it did provide for a weak two-chamber parliament, the Landtag. Austria had made Prussia promise to cease all schemes to create a unified German state. Too late, though, Prussia had already revealed its inclinations. Both countries wanted predominance among the German states. From 1850 to 1860, tension between Prussia and Austria grew. Partly it was economic tensions. Austria was not included in the highly profitable Zollverein. That was an agreement that there would be no tariffs in trade between members of the German Confederation, and this was a great deal for all of its members, particularly Prussia. Austria, though, not a member of the Zollverein, did not get any benefit from it. Partly as a result of the Zollverein, Prussia had a rapidly emerging wealthy, liberal middle class, and they longed for national unification. This group in particular associated national freedom with individual freedom. They wanted a strong parliament, one that had political power over the king, like in England, one that had control over the military. Wilhelm I ascended to the Prussian throne in 1861. The events that we've just seen in Italy weighed heavily on his mind. He saw war coming to Prussia. He didn't know where it would come from, but he did see it coming. On his short list were France and Austria. Wilhelm I wanted to do two things. Number one, significantly raise taxes, and number two, double the defense budget. Budgets had to get approved by the Prussian parliament, the Landtag, and they had the power of the purse. In 1862, liberals swept the parliamentary elections, and the newly elected parliament completely rejected Wilhelm I's military budget. Wilhelm I was still allowed to appoint the prime minister, and he needed somebody who was military-minded and who would stand up to Parliament, and his choice was Count Otto von Bismarck. Count Otto von Bismarck was appointed prime minister in 1862. He was one of the most important Germans who ever lived. He was landed aristocracy. He was a Junker, and he was a seasoned diplomat. He was a strong believer in monarchy. He was a smart politician, and he was power-driven. But Bismarck is best known for being consciously pragmatic. For him, it wasn't really about who was right and who was wrong. It was about what most needed to be done and who had the power to do it. And the word for his political strategy would become known as Realpolitik. In Realpolitik, you leave considerations about ideology and morality at the door. It's similar to Politik, which we talked about with the French Wars of Religion, where you leave your religious agenda at the door. In Realpolitik, these things clutter the clarity of your thinking. Instead, you carefully and clearly consider what's practical and expedient for the situation at hand to guide your decisions. Cavour also employed Realpolitik to unify Italy. Bismarck became prime minister in 1862 as Parliament was deadlocked over this military budget, and we see Realpolitik in action. Bismarck made a speech to Parliament in which he said that the big questions of the day would be decided with what he called blood and iron, rather than by speeches and resolutions. And he began a program of taxes and military spending without Parliament's approval, without the approval of the Landtag. Bismarck did all of this in the name of his, quote, gap theory. And the gap theory goes like this. The Constitution didn't specify what was to be done in the event of a budget dispute deadlock. In other words, there was a gap in the Constitution's provisions regarding who can do what in such an event. And since the Constitution did not say that Parliament was allowed to stop government operations in the event of a deadlock, the Parliament should not be allowed to stop government operations in the event of a deadlock. Therefore, the Prime Minister, Bismarck, should be able to tax and spend on his own if Parliament was deadlocked. For the next 4 years, the people elected liberal representatives in Parliament to oppose Bismarck. Bismarck searched for success abroad to make his government more popular. In the north, the German Confederation provinces of Schleswig-Holstein were claimed by Denmark. In 1864, with Austria's help, Bismarck successfully went to war with Denmark and took Schleswig-Holstein. Then Bismarck created a feud with Austria over how the two victors would administrate and divide Schleswig-Holstein. The result of all this was the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. Bismarck decided that he needed to remove Austria completely from German affairs. And he had just spent 4 years building the military. So he attacked Austria in a war that lasted just a mere 7 weeks. The military spending had paid off. Prussian troops had better railroads for transportation. They had more modern weapons than Austrian troops. The Prussians had breech-loading needle guns, and these were faster to load, and this provided much more flexibility in battle. The Austrians still had muzzle-loading guns. They were harder to load, and you had to load and fire standing up. The Battle of Sodova, also known as the Battle of Königsgrätz, on July 3, 1866, decided the entire Austro-Prussian War. In the peace treaty, Bismarck gave generous peace terms to Austria. There would be no war reparations. There would be no loss of Austrian territory. But Austria had to totally withdraw from German affairs. In other words, they could no longer order Prussia not to forge a united German state. Austria had little choice but to agree to this. Bismarck dissolved the German Confederation. The German Confederation had been around since 1815, formed by the Congress of Vienna. Bismarck then immediately reformed it, but this time without including Austria. The German Confederation's new name was now the North German Confederation. Austria had now agreed to stay out of Bismarck's way. Otto von Bismarck also had to patch things up with the Prussian parliament in order to get them to adopt his new North German Confederation's new constitution. Bismarck's problem was this. How could Bismarck make peace with these wealthy middle-class liberals and nationalists in Parliament? He needed to do it in a way that protected 4 things: the monarchy, the aristocracy, authoritarianism, and conservatism. Bismarck decided to present his new North German Constitution to them as a choice between 2 desirable pursuits. Wealthy middle classes liked both of these choices. But Bismarck stressed that the wealthy middle class could pursue one or the other, but not both. They needed to choose. One option was clearly more realistic than the other. Let's compare. He said, "We can pursue nationalism. It's immediate. It's certain. It is authoritarian. We already have a North German constitution that can provide this. Or we can pursue liberalism. It's going to be long and drawn out. It's going to be uncertain. It's going to be limited in scope. And we don't have a constitution that provides this." In his speech, Bismarck constantly described the Austro-Prussian War as a war to further the national development of Germany, which didn't politically exist yet. Bismarck made a deal that gave the liberals what they really wanted. They went for the nationalism, and it gave him what he really wanted, a North German Confederation. Bismarck was influenced by the way Napoleon III had bypassed the middle-class liberals in France by going directly to the people. This new constitution was called the North German Constitution and was adopted in 1867. Each state had its own government, often its own prince. The King of Prussia held the title of President. Bismarck would be the Chancellor, and the Chancellor was responsible only to the President. In spite of the name, it was a federal bureaucracy. Wilhelm I and Bismarck controlled the army. No state got to have its own independent army. Wilhelm I and Bismarck controlled all foreign affairs. No state got to have its own diplomats or embassies. The legislature had two houses. The lower house was elected by universal male suffrage. So Bismarck therefore had an apparatus with which to appeal directly to the common people through this lower house. The common people could respond to his appeal by electing representatives who supported his agenda. The North German Constitution represented the closest thing to a German nation that there had ever been up to this point. Bismarck was the force who had gotten the North German Confederation to this point. He was vital to its success. Ironically, Bismarck also knew that he was the biggest obstacle to German unification. Bismarck had been violating a legal constitution for the last 4 years. Under the extremely flimsy gap theory, he had been taxing and spending in total defiance of Parliament, and his actions could easily be labeled corrupt or even criminal. Bismarck made a speech to Parliament on September the 1st, 1866, and he said, "If you want this Constitution and all it represents, you'll pass my special Bill of Indemnity of 1866. This will retro-approve everything I've done for the last 4 years." The liberals in Parliament had been seeking a way to make peace with Bismarck since the Battle of Sadova back on July 3, 1866. The political timing of that battle had been perfect. Elections had been held that very day, and the liberals had lost a lot of seats. 2 days later, the Bill of Indemnity passed, 230 to 75. Bismarck was now off the hook for everything he had done. Bismarck and Parliament were finally on the same page. The southern states were still not on board: Bavaria, Baden, Württemberg, Hesse-Darmstadt. These all had a much smaller South German Confederation going. Bismarck had hoped that their membership in the Zollverein would glue them to the North German Confederation, but it didn't. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. Napoleon III felt threatened by the North German Confederation. This was an upset to the balance of power. He didn't like the Prussians because they were Protestants, and he didn't like the Hohenzollern family because they ruled over Prussia. And this was Wilhelm I and his family. Tensions had been steadily rising over 4 years. Bismarck started to see an opportunity in the tension to unite the South German Confederation with the North German Confederation. Austria was a write-off. They were never going to join. But the other 4 southern states that were a part of the South German Confederation were in the Zollverein. This was an important legal and economic bond. How could Bismarck bring these states fully into the North German Confederation? What about a common threat? A common enemy? Who could make a better common enemy than France? As time went on, Bismarck started seeing war with France as more and more inevitable and more desirable. France was the most powerful and most volatile nation in Western Europe. But if Bismarck could get the southern German states to ally with him against France, he would have a numerical superiority. And if he could win convincingly enough, he could forge a German empire. Bismarck was on the lookout for an opportunity to get into it with France. In the spring of 1870, a Prussian prince named Leopold was offered the Spanish throne. He was a Catholic, but he was also a Hohenzollern. And Napoleon III said no way to that. He was not going to have two Hohenzollerns on two borders. The people of France protested so loudly that Leopold withdrew his candidacy to the Spanish throne. So the issue seemed to be over. King Wilhelm I was staying at his summer residence in the resort town of Bad Ems, and the French ambassador to Prussia, Count Vincenzo Benedetti, visited King Wilhelm I. He demanded that King Wilhelm I promise never to permit a Hohenzollern to be a candidate for the Spanish throne again. Well, Wilhelm I refused to make such a promise, and they parted ways. Bismarck heard about the conversation and asked the king if he could publish it, and Wilhelm I said sure. So Bismarck rewrote the conversation. He didn't alter any facts, but he emphasized certain things. It made Count Benedetti look really insulting to the Germans, and it made Wilhelm I look really insulting to the French. He even told his friends, this is going to be like putting a red flag in front of the Gallic bull. Gallic means French. Bismarck had the Ems Dispatch, or the Ems Telegram, publicized on July 14th, and that's Bastille Day. Napoleon III decided that it was time to teach Prussia a lesson. He and his parliament declared war immediately, which was exactly what Bismarck had wanted all along. The German forces were superior in number, better trained, more quickly mobilized, and more technologically advanced. They beat the French easily. Napoleon III was captured at the Battle of Sedan. Paris held out for a 5-month siege, but ran out of food. By the time the Germans were in Paris, all the states of the South German Confederation wanted to unite with Wilhelm I and Bismarck. During the 5-month siege, they agreed to join not the North German Confederation, but an entirely new entity, the German Empire. While the siege of Paris was still going on, the Germans had a big ceremony in the Hall of Mirrors at the French Royal Palace of Versailles. Wilhelm I was formally pronounced Emperor of all of Germany. This new German empire still had the same constitutional structure as before. The emperor and his ministers had ultimate power. There was a 2-house legislature. The lower house was elected by universal male suffrage. This new German empire treated France very harshly, as we will see later. They took French territory. They forced France to pay massive war reparations. And the French never forgot their humiliation and their mistreatment at the hands of the German Empire. The creation of the German Empire was based on a new kind of conservatism. I call it semi-authoritarian. Part of the government is elected through universal male suffrage, but the aristocracy and the middle class, they're allied through the common core value of nationalism. Slavery and nation building in the United States. How does nation building in the United States relate to nation building in Europe? Well, there were a lot of divisions between North and South. On the north side, you had the family farm. You had factories built on English models, rapid urbanization, rapid transportation in the form of railroads and canals. Free labor would be more just and morally superior. Vast numbers of immigrants from Europe, and an economy increasingly dominated by manufacturing. On the south side, you had the family farm with no slaves, far fewer factories, very slow urbanization, and you know what they say, don't trust transportation. They had slavery, large profits, a strong cultural identity with the institution. Far fewer immigrants came from Europe. Everyone speaks English. And the economy was dominated by an aristocracy of plantation owners, a global supplier of cotton. 1846 to 1848, the Mexican War caused tensions between North and South to rise. From 1820 to 1860, the balance and representation between slave states and free states was extremely fragile and repeatedly threatened. Every time a territory gained statehood, there was this crisis. The South would panic that there would be an imbalance of free state senators to slave state senators. They were terrified that the Northern senators would take advantage of their majority to abolish slavery and take away the Southern way of life. So there was always this threat of secession. But somehow, some way, a compromise was always found. The Mexican War gained the U.S. a lot of new territory, and that territory was going to have to be incorporated into the United States very slowly and carefully to avoid even a hint of imbalance. Lincoln was the first president who was not a staunch supporter of maintaining the status quo. The fear was that Lincoln would admit new states as free states, but would block territories that tried to come in as slave states. And if that happened, the abolitionists in the Senate might make their move. There were 15 slave states when Abraham Lincoln was elected as president. 11 of them seceded. There were 4 slave states that remained loyal to the Union come what may, and those are often called the border states. They all went to war for almost exactly 4 years. The Union won and preserved the unity of the country. Important results. First, the 13th Amendment ended slavery. Second, the Homestead Act of 1862. Western lands were there for the taking for settlers. Third, the U.S. straddled the entire continent now. Manifest destiny was confirmed. And fourth, a new American nationalism emerged. It was grounded in economic expansion, and it was grounded in territorial expansion.